I was going to save this for the Smoky Mountain book, but this might be a good teaser for the Smoky Mountain book that I will be producing. Tim Horner basically has a lot of fucking nerve when he stole money from Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And for anybody that's asked me for the last fucking 20 years, I have not sugarcoated this. Here was the problem. The problem was that at the time that I was still in WCW in 1990, I was miserable. And I was looking for any place to get out of or to get out of there and go to. And I had, as everybody knows, the idea to book in my head in the car a territory out of Knoxville called Smoky Mountain Wrestling, because I had seen that of all the WCW shows, only the people in Knoxville still looked like they were interested, if they could be interested in that shit. And they were coming. They actually were drawing houses, which happened nowhere else. So anyway, as I'm doing this, and I knew that Sandy Scott was going to be available because either they had finished him up or were about to, and I'd already spoken to Rick Rubin about the preliminary idea of same, etc. So this was going to happen when I was done and when I thought the Midnight Express was done in WCW. And we're in Gainesville, Georgia one day at the TBS TV taping, and Tim Horner comes up and mentions to me, kind of on the, because he was in the same position. He was a underneath guy that was, not long for that world, and he knew it, and he was looking for things to do. And he mentioned to me that he had somebody that was going to put money into backing him running Knoxville. Just Knoxville, not a territory, just Knoxville as a town. And he mentioned getting TV in Knoxville, but Knoxville alone. Well, you can't get TV in one city and run, because then you can't keep a talent roster, etc. You have to have more, blah, blah, blah. But he wanted to be a star in his hometown because everybody knows he's from Morristown, which is how the Smoky Mountain offices ended up in Morristown. I let this motherfucker talk me into fucking moving to Morristown. Anyway, and he threw around the figure that they had up to $50,000 to invest in the whole goddamn project. So here I am faced with, I hadn't told anybody that didn't need to know and wasn't going to be involved what was going on with my process. But now all of a sudden, here's a guy who was a good worker and I never had a problem with, and I'd known him for a few years. We'd worked with him and Brad. Everything had been fine. Or elsewise I wouldn't even have fucking gone as far as I did to open my mouth. But he's talking about starting up TV in Knoxville and running at least Knoxville and trying to get some fucking spot shows around there, which would muddy my water trying to open up an entire territory. And I didn't want that to take place. So I let him in on the plans for Smoky Mountain Wrestling and suggested that he work with us instead of taking his fucking friends 50 grand or whatever the fuck and spending it on a TV just in Knoxville, etc. Work with us. We need a hometown baby face. We need a guy that lives in the area that can help promote, that looks good in a suit, that is well spoken, that could be an asset to the fucking promotion. And we could figure him in as a wrestler and with things he could do in the office, which he ended the merchandise. He ran until I fired him, and then Hildebrand took over, and suddenly it started making money. And we tried to have him open a wrestling school. But anyway, that's farther ahead. The point is, that's why I told him about it. And he was figured in as a babyface on the card, mostly in top positions. He was also figured in as far as he got a fax machine, he got some office equipment, blah, 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 right? He wanted to be the fucking Smoky Mountain heavyweight champion. I come to find out later on, that's what he was thinking. But as I always put it, and everybody understood this except Tim, if this was a movie, Tim Horner would be playing the best friend. He was a guy that you could keep around forever if you didn't make him your champion, because for one thing, nobody would buy him as a fucking champion. For another thing, if you make him a champion, and sooner or later he's going to burn out. And since he's figured in a deal and he's making fucking salary per week, we need him around forever, right? So anyway, My first inkling that we were going to have problems was when the baby faces started complaining to me, started calling me in the middle of the night, whether it be the Rock and Roll Express or whether it be even one of the Armstrongs that say something, and they were friends with him. But he was making snide comments like he had pull in the fucking locker room and that he was part of the booking, which that's another thing. Tim Horner never booked goddamn Lassie in a pet shop. I took ideas from fucking Kevin Sullivan, and I even took a few ideas from Sandy Scott and Brian Hildebrand. Pitched more than one thing to me that I did, but I never took an idea from Tim Horner because he didn't know a fucking ass and holding ground about booking fucking wrestling, except if he was going to put the belt on himself. So anyway, I hope I'm not getting too long-winded, but it says Brutal Bob opened the can of peas. We might as well go through with it. So anyway, my first notice is something was wrong. The baby faces would call and complain because he was trying to act like a big shot in the locker room, or possibly telling them that we were going to take their merchandise money and the office was going to start keeping it, which no, we weren't going to do that. We couldn't have afforded the goddamn baby face we had. But he was frustrated because everybody else was selling more fucking gimmicks than he was with his fucking foam lightning bolts. So then we worked a deal with him and Tony Anthony because they were good friends and they had great fucking matches. And we worked a deal with him, which I assumed that he knew was to get heat on our heel champion, Tony Anthony, for the potential fucking challenge of Tracy Smothers, who was about to be our top babyface since we couldn't get Brad Armstrong, and Brian Lee, of all things he was, top babyface, wasn't one of them. But when he found out that in the blow-off match with Tony that he wasn't winning the fucking belt, I in hindsight, I see it now, it bothered him more than I would assumed it would. And he came up with I even gave him an out to where I can't remember whether there was a foot on the ropes or something when the pinfall was scored. So they had to give the belt back, but he was a fucked over deal, right? Right. So on TV, he's supposed to give the belt back. Bob Armstrong is supposed to go out there as a baby face and say, Tim, sorry, as a man, I understand how you feel, but they got us on a technicality. White Boy and Ron Wright got us on a fucking technicality. Got to take this belt, got to give it back to him. Tim Horner, with unbeknownst to all of us, fucking brought a handicapped child that he knew from the Morristown area that came to the matches, and we always made over and made nice to and everything, but he brought him, was carrying him in his arms, and the kid was holding the belt, and Bob had to take the belt away from a handicapped child in his arms. And Bullet Bob comes back and says, what the fuck is this fucking shit? And I said, I didn't fucking know anything about it, right? That's how fucking fixated on being a babyface, being a glory hog he was. So then we even put a fucking, I love it. We put a fucking video on TV because he fancied himself a country singer. And our production company also did music, so they had him sing over a fucking Garth Brooks track. And he sounded like he was calling fucking dogs. But for a wrestler, it was good. Of course, we put it on TV to try to get him over. Hey, this multi-talented motherfucker. And Rick Rubin, who is a goddamn legitimate music producer, calls me and says, why did you play 4 minutes of that shit? It was fucking horrible. And Rubin had met Horner because we took him out there for one of our meetings with Rick. We were getting off the ground, me and Sandy. And Rick Rubin, the guy putting up the money, never got Tim Horner. He wasn't a fan of him as a goddamn wrestler. He wondered why I pushed him so much. He thought the fucking song sucked. And he, on more than one, probably 2 or 3 occasions, asked me when Tim Horner might be taking a break off the fucking roster. But I was paying Tim Horner a fucking salary equivalent to what the main event guys were making every goddamn week. And I'd promised him a fucking spot. So then I took him off the goddamn cards and put him in charge of a wrestling school, which I believe he ended up with at least 2 students that we knew about, because other people have told me that Horner trained them and promised them if they joined his school, he'd have a main event in the fucking Smoky Mountain wrestling matches at the Coliseum in Knoxville in 6 months. But we only ever heard about 2 that we were supposed to get the money from. And he talked me into hiring that girl I won't even go into right now from the fucking radio station to sell sponsorships, and renting her an office in the bank building that his best friend Buzz was the manager of. Let's see. Hold on here. So then I took him off the roster. I put him in charge of the school. I put him in charge. He was already in charge of merchandise. We weren't making any money on merchandise. And trying to sell sponsorships because he looked good in a suit, and he didn't do any of those either. But I kept him on 6 months. I kept him on fucking payroll of the same thing he was making to wrestle to do all that shit, right? Then we needed a ring truck. So since I know nothing I know nothing about giving birth to no motors. I don't know anything about cars. Sandy Scott wasn't a car guy. Horner says, I'll go out, I'll find us a fucking truck, a nice used truck we can get for cheap. He gets us a truck for $8,000. That ain't bad for one of those big moving trucks, right? And he says, my friend Buzz manages the bank. He can do the paperwork and give us a fucking best possible loan, right? With a good interest where we can just pay it per month. Well, great. Mm-hmm. So they have the paperwork done. So every month, Sandy Scott takes the fucking money out of one of the houses somewhere for the fucking truck payment and hands it to fucking Horner, and Horner signs a goddamn receipt for it. And by the way, in the next year or maybe year and a half, we put 3 engines in the fucking truck. We spent more money on the engines than we spent on the fucking truck because he bought a goddamn lemon. And finally, when I ended up firing Mr. Horner, the truck was on blocks somewhere. I never saw where the fuck it was because I was a heel. I couldn't go over to the goddamn babyface's fucking place wherever they goddamn dropped it off. Anyway, it was sitting up on blocks because it needed another fucking engine. And when I fired Horner, which I'll get to in a second, Sandy went to get the fucking title from him and found out that he had put the goddamn title in his name. And Smoky Mountain Wrestling had paid for the truck, but the title was in his name and he wasn't going to give the truck back so we could sell it for scrap. So between the truck and the fucking fax machine and the other miscellaneous bullshit that I know of, he got me for 10 grand. And that's besides the fact that merchandise never made him money while he was running it either because he felt it was below him since he needed to be a goddamn superstar, or more likely he just didn't give a fuck and or maybe stuck some of the money in his fucking pocket. So if he wants to call anybody a goddamn embezzler, that'd be a good place to start because as soon as Brian Hildebrand took over the merchandise, he was giving me a couple grand every so often, right? Oh, shit. Thank you, Brian. Amazing. Of course, he applied himself to everything, but, you know, he's the one I should have been paying Horner's money to all the goddamn long because besides for Sandy setting up the buildings, Brian Hildebrand was the most valuable guy in the company. But anyway, I fired Mr. Horner because after taking him off fucking 6 months and giving him fucking main event pay, a check every fucking week, to be the wrestling school guy, the sponsor guy, the Zabadai guy, because Rick Rubin, the money guy, didn't want him wrestling on his fucking show. I finally said, you ain't goddamn produced any, we don't have any students, we don't have any fucking sponsors that you've brought us. I've sold a few, but he never got nothing. And I said, and we don't have no students, we don't have no sponsors, and you're what was the other thing? Whatever the fuck merchandise making no money. So you're gonna have to start wrestling again if I'm gonna keep paying you. And I will pay you up to the first of the month, and then I'll start paying you X dollars per fucking match, which was more than I was paying most people. Okay, well, he got the goddamn money or the check at the end of the fucking week. And then the next weekend we had 2 shows. So he was pissed off because he didn't make as much money as he'd been making, even though he wrestled. It was because I was paying him per match. And in the following week, since Morristown sucked, probably because he was on the card and it was his hometown, I asked him if I could pay him the following morning in cash out of my pocket so that I could pay all the guys that had to leave town. And his wife came up and pitched a fit because his wife controls his goddamn life. And that's also why I had a top baby face in fucking East Tennessee that couldn't get juice because his wife wouldn't let him. His wife came up and screamed at me in front of all the fucking boys of how I should be paying him first. And that was bullshit, that he'd have to wait until Sunday morning from Saturday night for me to get some fucking cash, pay him out of my pocket so I could take care of the out-of-town talent. So I responded by not screaming at his fucking wife because she was holding his baby at the time. I responded by fucking telling.
So that's where he got that gimmick of carrying the disabled child.
Apparently. Apparently. So I told him afterwards, don't ever let his wife come up and yell at me in my face in front of the boys again, especially while carrying his fucking child around. And I decided that we had come to an end because he said, well, you got me last week, on the pay. I said, no, you actually got me the last 2 fucking years. And I fired him. And that's when he kept the truck. And that's when he kept the fax machine. And that's when Brian Hildebrand started taking over the merchandise. And that's when he disappeared from the fucking cards. And to this day, I've run into people in East Tennessee who tell me that they've seen Horner, and he talks about how he sold his interest in Smoky Mountain Wrestling and he don't blah, blah, blah. He never had a goddamn interest. It was a charity goddamn thing because I didn't want him muddying the fucking water, and I thought he was a nice guy, and I thought he could be a fucking help instead of a goddamn hindrance to the company. And basically he was a goddamn glory hog that thought that he was going to be the world champion in Morristown and didn't like the position that he ended up in and never gave a shit as long as it didn't relate to fucking him, and stole my truck and my fax machine. So if he's got anything to say about me, fuck you, Tim. That's the real fucking story. Good God.
Where does he fall on a scale of 0 to Terry Landell?
Actually, that part of the country breeds a bunch of Ernest T. Bass motherfuckers that like to bow up and puff their fucking chest out and act like a goddamn banty rooster. It must be the part of the culture that certain segment has to be. We ought to call them the chicken pluckers or possibly the chicken fuckers.
It seems why. So
hashtag
that was...
Tim Horner, hashtag chicken fucker. Let's see if we can get that trending.